The winter of 1882 came to Pine Hollow like a wolf with its teeth bared. Snow piled against the wooden buildings until their roofs groaned under the weight, and the wind howled through the gaps in the walls like the voices of the dead. Most folks had the good sense to stay indoors, huddled around their stoves with what little firewood they'd managed to stockpile before the storms hit. Naomi Bell wasn't most folks. She trudged through the knee-deep snow, her wool skirts heavy with ice, carrying a basket of dried herbs and tinctures. The widow Carmichael had been coughing blood for 3 days now, and no amount of cold or common sense would keep Naomi from her rounds. That's what she told herself. Anyway, the truth was simpler. An empty cabin was a cold companion, and work kept the memories at bay. The old storage shed stood at the edge of town, half buried in a snowdrift. Naomi barely glanced at it as she passed until she saw the dark shape sprawled across its threshold. At first, she thought it was a drunk who'd frozen to death. Pine Hollow had seen its share of those since the silver mines went bust. But as she drew closer, she noticed the blood. A dark stain spread beneath the man's body, already crystallizing in the bitter cold. Naomi set down her basket and knelt beside him. His face was turned away, pressed into the snow, but she could see he was young, perhaps 30, 35 at most. Dark hair matted with ice and blood. Good coat, though worn at the elbows. Not a vagrant. Then she pressed 2 fingers to his neck, expecting nothing. The skin was cold as marble. Then she felt it a pulse, faint as a whisper. "Lord have mercy," she muttered, already calculating. The widow Carmichael would have to wait. This man wouldn't last another hour in the cold. Naomi was stronger than her slight frame suggested. Years of hauling water and chopping wood had seen to that. But the stranger was tall and solidly built, and it took all her strength to drag him the quarter-mile to her cabin. By the time she got him inside, her back screamed and her hands were numb despite her mittens. The single room was sparse but clean, a bed in one corner, a pot-bellied stove, shelves lined with medicine bottles and dried herbs. She'd lived here 2 years now, ever since she'd fled Montana after everything fell apart. She managed to heave the stranger onto her bed, then stoked the fire until the stove glowed red. In the lamplight, she could see him better. A gash ran along his ribs, deep but clean, a knife wound, not a bullet. His breathing was shallow, labored. When she peeled back his shirt, she found bruises blooming across his chest like dark flowers. Someone had beaten this man near to death before putting a blade in him. Naomi had seen plenty of violence in her 34 years. Men who solved their problems with fists and guns. Women who bore the marks of their husbands' tempers. She'd learned young not to ask questions. But as she cleaned the stranger's wounds and stitched the gash closed, she couldn't help wondering what he'd done to earn such treatment. His pockets yielded a few coins, a folding knife, no papers or letters. The only thing of interest was an old gold ring, worn smooth with age, tucked into the inside pocket of his coat. Too small for a man's hand, a woman's wedding band. Maybe. She set it on the table beside the bed. For 3 days, the stranger burned with fever. Naomi spooned broth between his cracked lips, changed his bandages, kept the fire burning. She talked to him sometimes, not expecting answers, told him about the storm getting worse, about the Garrett boys getting caught stealing chickens, about anything except her own reasons for being alone in a cabin at the edge of nowhere. On the 4th morning, she woke to find him watching her. His eyes were gray as winter sky, focused despite the fever. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the small room. Naomi had fallen asleep in the chair beside the stove, her mending in her lap. "Water," he said, voice rough as sandpaper. She fetched a cup, helped him drink. His hands shook too badly to hold it himself. "How long?" he asked when he'd finished. 4 days. You were half dead when I found you." He absorbed this, gaze traveling around the cabin, taking inventory, a man used to waking in unfamiliar places, she thought. "My things. On the shelf there. Wasn't much." His eyes found the ring, and something flickered across his face, pain deeper than any physical wound. "What's your name?" Naomi asked. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't remember." She'd heard that before from men running from something. Usually it was a lie, but looking at the genuine confusion in his eyes, the way he pressed a hand to his temple as if trying to squeeze out memories, she believed him. "Head took quite a knock," she said. "Might come back to you." "Might not. Might not," she agreed. "You remember anything where you're from? How you ended up bleeding in the snow?" He shook his head slowly. "Just running, snow, then nothing." Naomi stood, smoothed her skirts. "Well, you can't be nothing while you're healing in my bed. I'll call you Ash." "Ash? You were covered in it when I found you, like you'd been sleeping by a dead fire." She moved to the stove, added another log. "Unless you prefer something else." "Ash is fine." He closed his eyes again. "Thank you for—" "It's what I do. I'm a nurse. Or was, anyway. Not anymore." She turned away, busying herself with the medicine bottles. "Not officially. Town doesn't much care for unmarried women in the healing profession. Says it's not proper. But you do it anyway. People get sick whether it's proper or not." When she looked back, he was studying her with those steady gray eyes, not the way most men looked at her, assessing her face, her figure, her worth as a potential wife. He looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "I should go," he said. "Soon as I can stand. You've done enough." "You try standing now. You'll tear those stitches and bleed all over my clean floor." She pulled her shawl tighter. "Storm's getting worse anyway. Nobody's going anywhere for a while." As if to emphasize her point, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Snow swirled past the glass like static. Ash, she supposed that was his name, now sank back against the pillows. The brief conversation had exhausted him. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. Naomi returned to her chair, picked up her mending, but her hands stayed still in her lap as she watched him sleep. It had been 2 years since she'd shared her space with anyone. 2 years since Thomas died in that fire, taking with him all her plans for a different life. She'd come to Pine Hollow to disappear, to be the spinster nurse who kept to herself and asked for nothing from anyone. Now here was this stranger, bleeding trouble all over her quiet existence. She should have left him in the snow. That's what the smart thing would have been. Let someone else find him. Deal with whatever violence had followed him to Pine Hollow. She had enough ghosts of her own without borrowing his. But she hadn't left him, and as the storm raged outside, sealing them both inside this small, warm space, she admitted to herself that she wasn't sorry. The next days passed in a strange rhythm. Ash slept mostly, waking only to eat and drink. His fever broke on the 6th day, leaving him weak but lucid. He insisted on trying to help holding the yarn while she wound it, reading aloud from her few books while she prepared medicines. His voice was good for reading, low and measured, though he stumbled sometimes over words as if they were foreign to him. "You're educated," she observed one evening as he read from her battered copy of Dickens. He paused, finger on the page. "I suppose I must be. Your hands, too, no calluses from mining or farming. You're no laborer." "What am I then?" She shrugged. "That's for you to remember." But she watched him when he wasn't looking, trying to piece together the puzzle. The way he moved despite his injuries, controlled, careful. How he automatically checked the windows and door before settling for the night. The knife wound had been precise, meant to hurt but not kill immediately. Someone had wanted him to suffer. On the 10th day, while she was out checking on the widow, Carmichael finally. Ash managed to stand. She found him by the window when she returned, one hand braced against the wall. "You're up." Barely, but there was satisfaction in his voice. "Storm's breaking." She looked past him to where weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. The snow had stopped, though drifts still buried half the town. "You'll be leaving, then—" It wasn't a question. He turned to look at her, and she was surprised by the uncertainty in his expression. I don't know where to go. Family. Can't remember any. Friends, work. He shook his head. It's all fog. Sometimes I think I almost have something. Then it's gone. His hand went unconsciously to the pocket where she'd returned the ring. I know this means something. I know it was important, but not why. Naomi set down her basket, began unpacking the medicines she'd prepared. Memory's a funny thing. Push too hard and it runs away. Let it be, and it might come back on its own. And if it doesn't? Then you make new ones. He was quiet for a moment. Then, why did you help me? I told you, I'm a nurse. No. He moved away from the window, slow and careful, lowered himself into the chair by the stove. You could have called for help, taken me to someone else. Why bring me here? Naomi considered lying. It would be easier. But something about this man, his directness, maybe, or the way he didn't press when she didn't want to answer, made her want to be truthful. I know what it's like, she said finally, to need to not be found for a while. Understanding passed between them, wordless but complete. Whatever he was running from, whoever had put that knife in his ribs, he wasn't ready to face it, and she wasn't ready to push him back into danger. I can work, he said, soon as I'm healed. Whatever needs doing, wood chopping, repairs. I won't be a burden. I didn't say you were. You didn't have to. She smiled despite herself. There's a lean-to out back needs fixing before the next storm. Roof's half caved in. I can do that. And the fence around the garden? Deer knocked it down last fall. That too. Can you cook? He considered. I don't know. Might be worth finding out. Might be, she agreed. But not until those ribs heal. You tear my stitching, I'll sew you up with kitchen twine next time. It was his turn to smile, just a slight upturn of his lips, but it transformed his face, made him look younger, less haunted. That night, as snow began to fall again, Naomi lay in her makeshift bed by the stove. She'd insisted he keep the real bed until he was healed and listened to his breathing across the room. It had been so long since she'd heard another person's presence in the darkness. She'd forgotten how comforting it could be. Dangerous thinking, she told herself. He'd leave as soon as he was well. Men like him, men with violence in their wake, they always left, and she'd be alone again. Which was what she'd chosen, what she'd wanted. But as sleep took her, she admitted another truth: she wasn't eager for him to remember who he was. Because when he did, Ash would disappear, and whoever he really was would take his place. And that man might not look at her with such steady, thoughtful eyes, might not read to her in the evenings or insist on helping despite his injuries, might not be someone she wanted in her small, careful life. Outside, Pine Hollow slept under its blanket of snow, and in the cabin at the edge of town, two damaged people shared warmth and silence, building something fragile out of nothing more than proximity and need. Neither of them called it hope. Not yet. But it was there all the same, quiet as snowfall, patient as spring. The first time Ash tried to cook, he nearly burned down Naomi's cabin. She'd gone to deliver medicine to the Hendricks family, leaving him with simple instructions: keep the stove fed, heat the leftover stew for lunch. When she returned, smoke billowed from the chimney and Ash stood in the doorway, coughing, a blackened pot in his hands. I thought cooking might come back to me, he said, sheepish. It didn't. Naomi surveyed the damaged soot on the ceiling, the acrid smell of charred beans. She should have been angry. Instead, she found herself fighting a smile. Well, now we know. You're no cook. My deepest apologies. Don't apologize. Just open all the windows before we suffocate. They spent the afternoon cleaning, and by evening the cabin smelled only faintly of smoke. As they sat down to a cold supper of bread and preserved peaches, Ash said quietly, No one's ever asked my name here. Why? Naomi considered. Pine Hollow's full of people who'd rather forget where they came from. The Anderson brothers' rumor says they robbed a bank in Colorado. Mrs. Garrett. She showed up 10 years ago with 2 black eyes and never mentioned a husband, though she wears a wedding ring. We don't ask because we don't want to be asked. And you? She met his steady gaze. I had a life in Montana. Now I don't. That's all anyone needs to know. He nodded, accepting this. Over the past 3 weeks, they'd developed an understanding. He didn't press about Thomas or the fire. She didn't push about his missing memories. They existed in the present, 2 people sharing space and warmth against the winter. But the town was beginning to notice. That man still staying with you, Mrs.? Morrison asked when Naomi came to treat her rheumatism. The older woman's eyes glittered with curiosity poorly disguised as concern. He's recovering from injuries. Where else would he go? The boarding house, perhaps, now that he's well enough to walk around. Mrs. Olson charges $2 a week. Does he look like he has $2? Mrs. Morrison sniffed. Still, people talk. People always talked, Naomi thought. They'd talked when she'd refused Judge Carter's son's proposal. They'd talked when she'd continued working after Thomas died instead of going back east to live with distant cousins. Let them talk. But Ash heard the whispers too. She could see it in the way he tensed when they walked through town together, how he kept distance between them in public. I'm causing you trouble, he said one evening as they sat by the stove. He'd spent the day repairing the lean-to, despite her protests that his ribs weren't fully healed. No more than I cause myself. That's not true. He stared into the fire. A woman's reputation is my concern, not yours. She set down her knitting, fixed him with a look that had cowed stronger men. I'm 34 years old. Ash, I've buried a fiancé, lost a profession, and made my own way in a town that thinks I should have shriveled up and blown away by now. You think I care what Elmira Morrison whispers over her tea? He was quiet for a moment. Then, you called me Ash again. It's your name, isn't it? Is it? He pulled out the gold ring, turned it in the firelight. Sometimes I dream about a woman, dark hair, laughing. She calls me something else, but I can never quite hear it. Naomi watched him study the ring. She'd seen that look before. In the mirror, the desperate search for something lost. Do you think she's looking for you? I think... He closed his fist around the ring. I think something happened to her. Something I should have prevented. You don't know that. Don't I? He looked up, and the rawness in his eyes made her breath catch. Why else would I have her ring? Why else would someone want me dead? She had no answer for that. The next morning brought the first real thaw. Icicles dripped from the eaves, and the paths through town turned to muddy slush. Ash insisted on going with Naomi on her rounds, carrying her medical bag despite her protests. They were returning from the Garrett farm when they saw him a stranger on horseback, picking his way carefully down Main Street. He wore city clothes and a bowler hat, out of place among the rough miners and farmers of Pine Hollow. Ash went very still. What is it? Naomi asked. I don't know. Something... He shook his head. We should go. But it was too late. The stranger had spotted them. His eyes swept over Naomi dismissively, then fixed on Ash with sharp interest. Excuse me, he called, dismounting. Might I have a word? Ash stepped slightly in front of Naomi. About what? I'm looking for someone. A man who might have passed through here recently. About your height, dark hair. The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Goes by the name of Beaumont Black. Never heard of him, Ash said evenly. No, curious. You match the description remarkably well. The stranger reached into his coat, and Ash tensed, but he only pulled out a photograph. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. Ash took the photograph. Naomi, peering around his shoulder, saw a group of well-dressed people on what looked like a mine platform. She couldn't make out faces clearly, but one figure stood apart from the others, his posture familiar. Sorry, Ash said, handing it back. Can't help you. The stranger studied him for a long moment. I see. Well, if you happen to remember anything? I'm staying at the boarding house. Name's Pinkerton. Samuel Pinkerton. A Pinkerton agent. Naomi felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. She'd heard stories about the detective agency strikebreakers, bounty hunters, men who tracked down criminals for whoever paid highest. After Pinkerton walked away, Ash remained frozen in the street. We need to leave, Naomi said quietly. He blinked, seemed to come back to himself. Yes. They walked quickly back to the cabin, not speaking until they were inside with the door barred. Beaumont Black, Naomi said. Is that your name? I don't know. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. When he said it, something flickered, but I can't grasp it. What about the photograph? The same, like looking through frosted glass. He looked up at her. You should make me leave. Tonight, before he comes back. Did you do something terrible? Are you the kind of man who deserves to be hunted? I don't know, he said again, voice breaking. God help me, I don't know. Naomi knelt in front of him, took his hands. They were shaking. Listen to me, she said. I've known evil men, treated their wives' bruises, seen what they do to those weaker than themselves. You're not that. Whatever you did or didn't do, whoever you were before, you're not evil. How can you be sure? Because evil men don't worry about being evil. They don't cook burnt beans or read Dickens or insist on fixing fences for widowed nurses. She squeezed his hands. They don't look at me the way you do. How do I look at you? The question hung between them. Naomi became acutely aware of their joined hands, of how close they were. Like I'm a person? She said finally. Not a scandal or a tragedy or a woman past her prime, just a person. He turned his hands in hers, palm to palm. Naomi. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. They pulled apart, Ash moving instinctively toward the window while Naomi went to the door. Who is it? Dr. Holcomb. She relaxed slightly. The town doctor, though he barely deserved the title. She opened the door to find the elderly man swaying on her doorstep, clearly deep in his cups. Miss Bell, he slurred. Heard you got a patient staying here. He's recovering well. Thank you for asking. Heard something else, too. Holcomb leaned in, breathing whiskey fumes. Heard there's money for information about strangers in town. Lot of money. Ash appeared at Naomi's shoulder. How much money? Holcomb's eyes lit up. $500 for information leading to the capture of one Beaumont Black. That'd keep a man in whiskey for a good long while. Or pay for a new doctor who doesn't reek of spirits. Naomi said coolly. Good evening, doctor. Holcomb. She closed the door in his face. $500, Ash said quietly. That's a fortune. Blood money, Naomi said. Won't spend well. You could use it. Get out of Pine Hollow. Set up somewhere proper. Stop! She turned to face him. Just stop. I'm not turning you in for money. Why not? You don't owe me anything. Don't I? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you're the only one who was saved this winter when I found you. I was disappearing, going through the motions, treating people who barely tolerate me, coming home to silence. Then you were here, and I had a reason to wake up. Someone to cook for, even if you do burn everything. Someone to talk to who doesn't look at me like damaged goods. Naomi. I'm not finished. She took a breath, steadied herself. I don't care if you're Beaumont Black or Ash or President Grant himself. I care that you tried to fix my roof with broken ribs. I care that you walk me home from my rounds even though the town gossips. I care that you're here. He crossed to her in 2 strides, caught her face in his hands. For a moment they stood there, breathing the same air, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. I could be dangerous, he whispered. I could bring trouble you can't imagine. I've had my share of trouble, I'm still standing. You deserve better than a man who can't even remember his own name. I deserve, she said firmly, what I choose, and I choose this. He kissed her then, careful and desperate at once. She tasted winter on his lips, and something else promise, maybe, or just shared loneliness finding its echo. When they pulled apart, her hands were fisted in his shirt. Stay, she said. Whatever comes, we'll face it, but stay. He rested his forehead against hers. Until I remember, until we know what kind of man I really am. And then you decide if I'm still worth keeping. Outside, she heard voices, Pinkerton asking questions. Money changing hands. Time was running short, but for now, in this moment, they had each other in the warmth of the stove and the silence that said more than words. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now, the ground was still frozen when they began. Ash drove the spade into the earth behind Naomi's cabin, each strike jarring his still tender ribs. The plot for the garden would be small, just enough for vegetables to supplement what she could buy or trade for in town. You're going to hurt yourself, Naomi said for the third time, watching from the back step. I'm fine. He wasn't, but the work felt good, necessary. After a week of ducking Pinkerton's questions and suspicious glances from townspeople, he needed to build something. Spring had come reluctantly to Pine Hollow. Snow still clung to the shadows, but green shoots pushed through where the sun touched. The air smelled of mud and pine sap and possibility. At least let me help, Naomi said, setting down her mending. You are helping. You're keeping me company. She made an exasperated sound, but stayed on the step, wrapping her shawl tighter. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past weeks, him taking on the heavy work her previous solitude had forced her to manage alone, her tending his still healing body and slowly coaxing his memories toward the light. Some had returned. Small things, mostly the taste of good tobacco, the way to tie a specific knot, the words to a hymn he found himself humming, but nothing that answered the crucial questions. Who was Beaumont Black? What had he done? Who wanted him dead? Pinkerton had extended his stay at the boarding house. Twice more he'd approached them in town, always polite, always watching. The photograph had been joined by others' mining contracts, newspaper clippings too blurred to read. Each time, Ash had looked and shaken his head, and each time Pinkerton's smile had grown thinner. He's not going to give up, Naomi had said the previous night. No, Ash agreed. He's not. Now, breaking ground for this garden. He tried not to think about leaving, about what would happen when his memories returned or Pinkerton lost patience. He focused instead on the bite of the spade, the burn in his shoulders, the way Naomi hummed while she worked. By afternoon, they'd cleared a decent plot. Ash leaned on the spade, surveying their work, when movement caught his eye. Young Timothy Morrison stood at the corner of the cabin, fidgeting with his cap. Mrs. Bell, Miss Bell. Naomi rose, brushing dirt from her skirts. What is it, Timothy? It's my ma. She's taken poorly. Says her chest hurts something awful. Pa said to fetch you quick. Naomi was already moving, gathering her medical bag. Tell her I'm coming. The boy ran off. Naomi turned to Ash, who was already pulling on his coat. You don't have to come, she said. Try to stop me. They found Mrs. Morrison pale and breathless in her bed, one hand pressed to her chest. Her husband hovered nearby, wringing his hands. Started an hour ago, he said, just sudden-like. She was making bread and then... Naomi was already examining her patient, fingers finding the pulse at her wrist. Ash recognized the focused intensity that transformed her from the quiet woman who shared his days to the professional she'd been trained to be. Mrs. Morrison, I need you to breathe slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Naomi's voice was calm, authoritative. Mr. Morrison, open those windows. Timothy, Fetch cold water from the well." For the next hour, Ash watched her work. She administered digitalis from her bag, kept the woman calm, monitored her breathing. Gradually, Mrs. Morrison's color improved and her breathing eased. "Angina," Naomi explained quietly to Mr. Morrison. "Her heart is struggling. She needs rest, no heavy work, and these pills twice daily. I'll show you the dose." "Thank you," Morrison said, then hesitated. "About the payment." "We'll work something out," Naomi said, as Ash had known she would. Half the town owed her for medicines and treatments they couldn't afford. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Morrison caught Naomi's hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for what I said about—" Her eyes flicked to Ash. "Rest now," Naomi said gently. "That's all that matters." "Walking home," Ash said. "You saved her life." "I did my job." "The job they won't let you have officially." She shrugged. "Their rules, not mine." They were passing the church when Reverend Dawson stepped out. The older man had always been cordial to Naomi, one of the few who didn't seem to care about her unmarried status or unorthodox living arrangement. "Miss Bell, Mr." He paused, waiting. "Ash," Ash supplied. "Mr. Ash, might I have a word?" They followed him into the small church. It smelled of beeswax and old wood, afternoon light filtering through plain glass windows. "I've had a visitor," Dawson said without preamble. "Mr. Pinkerton. He asked many questions about you, Mr. Ash." Ash tensed. "And—" "I told him I make it my business to tend souls, not histories." Dawson's eyes were kind but shrewd. "However, he showed me something that gave me pause. A newspaper from Denver. The story was about a mine explosion, 30 men dead, and a man named Beaumont Black who supposedly set the charges." The words hit Ash like physical blows. Mine. Explosion. 30 dead. Images flashed smoke, screaming. The mountain coming apart, but he couldn't grasp them fully. "I didn't," he said, though he wasn't sure what he was denying. "I believe you," Dawson said simply. "I've seen killers. They don't spend their time building gardens for widowed nurses." "Reverend," Naomi began, but he held up a hand. "I won't betray a confidence, but Pinkerton is getting desperate. He's wiring for more men. You need to decide, Mr. Ash, whether to run or make a stand." They left the church in silence. Back at the cabin, Ash stood before the newly turned garden plot, seeing not soil but scorched earth, not potential but destruction. 30 men, he said. "You don't know." "Don't I?" He turned to her, anguish clear on his face. "What else would drive someone to put a knife in my ribs? What else would bring a Pinkerton man to this nowhere town?" Naomi crossed to him, took his face in her hands. "Look at me. Whatever happened, whoever you were, you're not that man now. You're the one who reads to me at night and burns beans and builds gardens. That's who you are. What if it's not enough? What if I remember and find out I'm exactly the monster they say? Then we'll face that together, but not today." She pulled him toward the cabin. "Today, we plant seeds." They worked until sunset, marking rows, planning what would grow where. Potatoes here, carrots there, herbs along the border. With each decision, Ash felt himself settling, anchoring to this small plot of ground and the woman beside him. That night, as they sat by the fire, he said, "When I was delirious with fever, you said I talked, called out." Naomi looked up from her knitting. "You did." "What did I say?" She was quiet for a moment. "You called for someone named Rachel, begged her to get out, to run. You said, 'I'll find another way,' over and over." "Rachel," the name resonated like a bell in his chest. Dark hair, laughing, the woman in his dreams. "I think," he said slowly, "she was in the mine. When whatever happened, happened. Your wife. He touched the ring in his pocket. Maybe, or sister, or I don't know, but she mattered, and I lost her. Naomi set aside her knitting, moved to sit beside him on the floor before the fire. Tell me what you remember. Fragments, the smell of rock dust, forms to fill out mining forms. I think I knew about explosives, how to set charges, but there's more. Arguments, someone saying it wasn't safe, that the mountain was unstable, being told to do it anyway. By who? I don't know. Men in suits, owners, maybe. He pressed his palms to his eyes. God, what if I did it? What if I set those charges knowing? Stop. Naomi's voice was firm. You're not remembering, you're imagining. There's a difference. She was right. He forced himself to breathe, to focus on what he knew rather than what he feared. Pinkerton will be back tomorrow, he said. Yes. I should leave tonight, lead him away from you. No. Naomi. No, she said again. We started a garden today. You don't plant seeds and then abandon them. You stay, you water them, you watch them grow. That's what you do. Even if staying brings trouble. Life is trouble. The choice is whether to face it alone or together. He pulled her close, breathed in the scent of her hair, lavender and wood smoke. How did you get so wise? Burying one life and building another teaches you things. She rested her head on his shoulder. I'm not losing someone else to other people's ideas of justice. Not without a fight. You barely know me. I know enough. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Not winter's howl, but spring's restless energy. Change coming whether they wanted it or not. Tomorrow, Ash said, we'll start on the chicken coop. And the fence around the garden? Keep the deer out. And repair the front step. It's coming loose. All that in one day. Why not if Pinkerton's bringing more men? Might as well have everything ready. Ready for what? He considered. For whatever comes next, good or bad. That's all anyone can do, I suppose. That's all anyone can do, he agreed. Later, lying in the dark, him still in the bed, her on her pallet by the stove. The proprieties maintained despite everything Ash thought about seeds and soil and second chances. About a woman who looked at him and saw possibilities instead of problems. About the choice between running and taking root. 30 men dead. The weight of it sat on his chest like stones, but alongside it, lighter but no less real. Was this Naomi humming while she worked? Mrs. Morrison breathing easier. A garden waiting to grow. He'd been Ash for 2 months now. Maybe that was who he was meant to be, not the man who might have set those charges, but the one who built new things from scorched earth, the one who stayed. In her corner, Naomi's breathing deepened into sleep. Ash listened to it, memorizing the rhythm, storing it against whatever darkness might come. Tomorrow, Pinkerton would return with his questions and photographs. Tomorrow, more memories might surface, bringing with them truth he wasn't sure he wanted to know. But tonight, he was just a man in a warm cabin with work-roughened hands and hope struggling to grow despite the season. Tonight, that was enough. The seeds were planted. Now came the harder task, tending them through whatever weather arrived. The memories came back the night they burned the old barn boards. Ash had spent the day dismantling what remained of a collapsed shed at the edge of Naomi's property, salvaging what lumber he could for the chicken coop, the rotten pieces they'd piled for burning. As flames consumed the weathered wood, the smoke triggered something deep in his mind, not gentle recollection, but violent resurgence, like a dam breaking. No, 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 get them out! He was on his knees in the dirt before he knew he'd fallen, hands clawing at nothing. Seeing not Naomi's yard, but a mountainside in Colorado. Smoke pouring from the mine entrance. Men stumbling out, coughing, crying, and deeper in. Rachel, Rachel! Ash! Naomi's hands on his shoulders, her voice cutting through the chaos. You're here. "You're safe. Look at me." He couldn't. He was back there, in the smoke and screaming. I told them the mountain was unstable, told Garrett and his partners. The survey showed fault lines, water seepage. One blast in the wrong place would bring it all down. "Breathe," Naomi commanded. "Just breathe." They didn't care. Silver prices were falling. They needed to reach the new vein fast, beat the other mines to market. His voice broke. Made me sign off on the blast plan. Said if I didn't, they'd find someone who would. And I needed the money. Rachel was sick consumption. The sanatorium cost. The memories flooded back with cruel clarity. Rachel, his sister, coughing blood into handkerchiefs. The expensive Swiss doctors who promised mountain air would cure her. The mine owner's smooth assurances that the risk was minimal. "I modified the charges," he gasped. "Reduced them, changed the pattern. Thought I could make it safer. But the mountain was already breaking. All those years of digging, taking, hollowing it out. It was waiting to fall." Naomi held him as he shook, her presence the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with memory. The blast went wrong, not too strong, too weak. Didn't clear the rock properly, so they sent men in to dig. That's when the mountain gave way. Not all at once, but in stages, passages collapsing, air shafts sealing, 30 men trapped. Where was Rachel? In the mine office. She'd come to bring me lunch, saw the panic starting. Went to help get men out. His hands fisted in the dirt. I went in after her. Found her trying to dig through a collapse with her bare hands, trying to reach the men calling from the other side. I dragged her out. She fought me, said we couldn't leave them. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the darkening sky. Ash's breathing gradually slowed. She died 2 days later, not from the cave-in. Her lungs finally gave out. The shock, the smoke, the exertion. It was too much. She died hating me for saving her instead of them. Naomi said nothing, just held him tighter. Garrett and his partners blamed me for the collapse. Said I'd set the charges wrong deliberately. Maybe for the unions or a rival company. They had pull with the territorial governor, the judges. The investigation was a sham. They needed someone to hang for those 30 dead miners. And I was convenient. "So you ran." My foreman, Jim Santos, got me out. Said they were coming to arrest me that night. I barely made it to the rail line before they started hunting. He touched his side where the knife wound had been. Guess one of them finally caught up in Pine Hollow. They sat in silence as the fire burned down. Naomi's practical mind was already working through the implications. Beaumont Black wasn't a killer. He was a scapegoat. But that wouldn't matter to Pinkerton or the law. Justice and truth parted ways when money got involved. "We need to get you somewhere safe," she said. "No." He pulled back to look at her. "I'm done running. Done letting them write the story. Ash Beaumont, whoever you are, I'm still Ash," he said firmly. "Beaumont Black died in that mine with those 30 men, but I won't let his ghost keep running. Not anymore. They'll arrest you, take you back to Colorado for trial. Maybe, or maybe it's time someone heard the truth." Naomi studied him in the firelight. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes since she'd found him was gone, replaced by something harder, more determined. "All right," she said. "What do you need?" The next morning, they put their plan in motion. While Ash worked openly in the garden, let Pinkerton see him. No, he wasn't hiding. Naomi made quiet visits around town. The surveyor who'd drunk himself to death last winter, his widow still had his papers. The telegraph operator owed her for treating his son's fever. Even Dr. Holcomb, sober for once, proved useful when properly motivated. By afternoon, she'd gathered what they needed: survey reports showing the mine's instability, telegrams from the territorial mining inspector warning about safety violations, even a letter from a dead miner's widow mentioning that her husband had worried about the mountain breaking apart from inside. "It's not proof," Naomi said, spreading the documents on her table. "But it's doubt. Sometimes that's enough." Ash picked up the survey report, recognized his own notations in the margins. I thought all this was destroyed. Men like Garrett are good at making evidence disappear, but they're not perfect. They forget about widows and clerks and all the small people who keep copies. A knock interrupted them. They tensed, but it was only Reverend Dawson. "Pinkerton's at the telegraph office," he said without preamble. "3 more men arrived on the morning train. They're planning to take you tonight." "Then we move now," Ash said. "Move where?" Dawson asked. "The church, neutral ground. Will you help?" The Reverend considered. "I've been praying on this, reading about truth and justice and mercy. Yes, I'll help." Word spread quickly through Pine Hollow mysteriously, but Naomi suspected Mrs. Morrison's hand in it. By evening, the church was fuller than Sunday service. Miners, farmers, townspeople who'd benefited from Naomi's care, all crowded into pews and along walls. Pinkerton arrived with his men to find not a fugitive waiting for arrest, but a community gathered. "What is this?" he demanded. "A hearing," Reverend Dawson said calmly. "Mr. Black has asked to speak his piece before you take him. These folks want to listen." "This isn't legal." "Neither is hunting a man without a warrant," the sheriff interrupted. Naomi had treated his wife's difficult birth last year. "You show me papers, Mr. Pinkerton. I'll help you serve them. Otherwise, you're just another bounty hunter. And we don't much care for those here." Pinkerton's face darkened, but he had no warrant, only promises of payment for delivery. "Fine. Let him talk. Won't change anything." Ash stood before the altar, Naomi beside him. He spoke simply, without dramatics, laying out the truth as he remembered it. The unstable mine, the pressure to extract ore quickly, his attempts to minimize risk, his sister's death, the cover-up that followed. When he finished, Pinkerton laughed. "A pretty story. You have any proof?" "We do," Naomi said. She presented the documents they gathered, reading key passages aloud, the surveyor's warnings, the inspector's concerns, the pattern of negligence that preceded the disaster. "Forgeries," Pinkerton said, but doubt crept into his voice. "Then let's ask someone who was there," a voice called from the back. Everyone turned. A Mexican man stood in the doorway, travel dusty and lean. Ash's intake of breath was audible. "Jim." Jim Santos stepped forward. "Heard you were in trouble. Jefe figured it was time to stop being scared." He faced the crowd. "I was foreman at the Garrett mine. I saw everything. The bosses pushing for speed over safety. Black Beaumont fighting them every step. The night before the collapse, he tried to shut down the operation. Garrett himself threatened to ruin him if he didn't sign off on the blast." "You're his friend," Pinkerton objected. "Your word." "My word as a foreman with 15 years' experience against men who've never set foot underground." Santos pulled out a worn ledger. "I kept records too. Every safety violation, every corner cut, every warning ignored. Names, dates, everything." The church erupted in murmurs. Pinkerton's men exchanged uncertain glances. "This changes nothing," Pinkerton said, but his conviction wavered. "I'm paid to bring him in." "Paid by who?" Naomi asked. "The same men who caused 30 deaths through greed and negligence, the ones who need someone to blame so they can keep their fortune and reputation." "Justice." "Justice, Mrs." Morrison stood up. "This man helped rebuild my fence after storms took it. His woman saved my life not 3 days ago. That's more justice than your employers ever showed those dead miners." Others stood, voicing support. The Hendricks family, whose son Ash had pulled from a well. The widow Carmichael, who'd watched him repair her roof for nothing but soup and gratitude. Even Dr. Holcomb, swaying slightly but resolute. "You take him. You go through us," someone called. Others voiced agreement. Pinkerton looked around the church, calculating odds. 4 men against a town, with the sheriff standing pointedly neutral but watchful. "This isn't over," he said finally. "There's still law in this territory." "Yes," Reverend Dawson said mildly. And perhaps it's time the law looked at the real criminals. The territorial prosecutor might be very interested in Mr. Santos's ledger, and I believe the newspaper in Denver would find this story compelling. Mine owners who let 30 men die for profit, then tried to frame the one man who fought for safety, makes for powerful reading. Pinkerton's jaw worked. He was a practical man, and he could see which way the wind blew. Without another word, he turned and stalked out, his men following. The church exhaled collectively. People pressed forward, shaking Ash's hand, patting his shoulder, but he only had eyes for Naomi, who stood quietly amid the chaos, watching him with that steady gaze that had anchored him from the beginning. Later, after the crowd dispersed and they'd thanked everyone, especially Jim, who would stay a few days to rest, they walked home through streets lit by spring moonlight. "It's not over," Ash said. "Pinkerton was right about that." "No," Naomi agreed. "But it's a start. Santos's evidence. The town's support. Garrett and his partners won't find it so easy to make you disappear now. I should write to the territorial prosecutor myself, make a formal statement. Tomorrow, tonight, we just won." They stopped in front of the cabin, looking at the garden plot, the half-built chicken coop, all the beginnings they'd made. "I'm not Beaumont Black anymore," Ash said. "He died in Colorado with his sister and those 30 men. I'm just Ash now, the man who builds gardens with Naomi Bell." "Is that enough?" He pulled her close. "It's everything." Inside, they stoked the fire and sat together, not talking of the past or future, but just being present. The documents that might clear his name lay on the table. The seeds they'd planted waited in the earth. Justice and growth both took time, but they'd made a beginning. And for tonight, that was victory enough. The letter from Denver arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous postal clerk who'd clearly been instructed to note Ash's reaction. Naomi watched from the doorway as he broke the seal, her hands white-knuckled around a dish towel. "Well," she asked when he'd read it through twice. "The territorial prosecutor wants to see me. Says new evidence has come to light regarding the Garrett mine disaster." He looked up, expression unreadable. "I'm to present myself within 2 weeks or face immediate arrest." Naomi crossed to him, took the letter. The language was formal but not hostile, certainly different from the wanted posters that had driven him to Pine Hollow. "Santos's testimony made a difference," she said. "Maybe, or maybe they just want me where they can control what happens." He stood, paced to the window. "If I go to Denver, I might not come back." "If you don't go, you'll never be free of this." They'd had variations of this conversation over the past week. Ever since Pinkerton had retreated, the town's support had bought them time, but not resolution. Ash remained a wanted man, even if the hunters had temporarily backed off. "Come with me," he said suddenly, turning. "To Denver, I don't want to face this alone." Naomi set down the letter. "Ash." "I know it's asking too much. Your work here, your life. My life is making medicines for people who still half expect me to grow a pointed hat and cackle." She moved to him, took his hands. "But Denver, that was your life with her, with Rachel. I'm not sure I belong in that story." "You belong wherever I am," he said fiercely. "You're the reason I can face this at all. Without you, I'd still be running, or dead in the snow." She was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands. His were rough now from months of labor, no longer the soft hands of a mining engineer. Hers bore the stains of herbs and tinctures, the calluses of a woman who'd made her own way. "All right," she said finally. "We'll go to Denver, but first, there's something we need to do." That evening found them in the small cemetery outside town. Naomi led him to a simple headstone near the back, where the poorer plots lay. Thomas Brennan. Ash read, 1849 to 1880. A good man taken too soon. "My fiancé," Naomi said quietly. "We were going to be married that spring. He was a firefighter, one of the few who'd have married a woman who insisted on keeping her profession. There was a fire at the Mercantile. The roof collapsed. She knelt, brushed leaves from the stone. I couldn't save him. All my training, all my skills, and I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Ash knelt beside her. Is that why you left Montana? Partly, but mostly because I couldn't stop trying to save everyone else. Working myself to exhaustion, taking risks, as if somehow saving enough others would balance the scales. She smiled sadly. The town council said I was becoming reckless, unseemly, suggested I might be happier elsewhere. Their loss. I thought so too, but they weren't entirely wrong. I was running just as much as you were, from grief, from failure, from the future I'd planned that went up in smoke. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. The thing is, I built a life here anyway. Not the one I expected, but real nonetheless. And then you arrived, bleeding on my doorstep, and suddenly I had someone to save again, only this time you saved me back. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the quiet dead. Ash understood what she was telling him, that going to Denver meant risking everything they'd built, but that some ghosts needed facing. After, he said, after Denver, whatever happens, we come back here, build that life properly, maybe even make it official, if you'll have me. Is that a proposal, Mr. Black? It's a promise, Miss Bell, from Ash, not Beaumont, the man you made from what was left. She kissed him then, there among the headstones, sealing a pact with the past before facing the future. The next days passed in preparation. Jim Santos agreed to accompany them. His testimony would be crucial. Reverend Dawson wrote letters of character reference. Even Dr. Holcomb, in a rare sober moment, penned a statement about Naomi's value to the community, suggesting none too subtly that the town expected her safe return. The morning of departure, half of Pine Hollow gathered at the stage stop. Mrs. Morrison pressed a basket of food into Naomi's hands. The sheriff pulled Ash aside. You get in trouble in Denver, you send word. This badge might not mean much in the city, but I've got friends who remember what law means beyond politics. The stagecoach rolled in, dusty and mud-splattered from spring roads, as Ash helped Naomi aboard. She looked back at the town that had become home despite itself. Scared, he asked, settling beside her. Terrified, she admitted. But not of what you think. I'm afraid that when you see Denver again, see your old life, you'll remember who you really are. And that man might not need a spinster nurse from nowhere. He pulled out the gold ring he'd carried all these months, held it up to the light, then, deliberately, he opened the coach window and threw it out into the sagebrush. What? Why did you do that? Because I'm not going to Denver to reclaim Beaumont Black's life. I'm going to bury him properly, clear his name so Ash can live free. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. With you, if you'll still have me after you see what kind of world I came from. The stage lurched into motion. Jim Santos, riding alongside on horseback, touched his hat brim in salute. Behind them, Pine Hollow grew smaller, but not less significant. It would be there when they returned, if they returned. The journey took 3 days. They stayed in way stations, Naomi and Ash maintaining propriety by sleeping in separate quarters, though they sat close during the bone-jarring rides and talked in low voices about everything except what awaited them. Denver, when it finally appeared, was a shock after Pine Hollow's rustic simplicity. Buildings of brick and stone, streets choked with carriages and commerce, the air thick with coal smoke and ambition. Ash grew quieter as they entered the city, his face settling into harder lines. They took rooms at a modest hotel Jim recommended, clean, but not fancy enough to draw attention. That first night, Ash stood at the window staring out at the gas-lit streets. I remember now, he said. All of it. The apartment on Larimer Street, the gentlemen's club where Garrett held court, The survey office where I filed reports no one wanted to read. His laugh was bitter. I thought I was important, thought I was building something that mattered. You were trying to keep people safe, Naomi reminded him. That mattered. To 30 dead miners. To their families, when they learn the truth. To the next miners who might be saved by stronger regulations. She joined him at the window. Don't let this city make you small again. You're not that man anymore. The next morning, they presented themselves at the prosecutor's office. William Hartley was younger than Naomi expected, with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles. Mr. Black, I've been reading some interesting documents. It seems the story of the Garrett mine disaster might be more complex than initially presented. For 2 hours, Ash told his story again while a clerk took notes. Santos provided his testimony, backed by the ledger he'd kept. Naomi watched Hartley's expression shift from skepticism to interest to something like anger. You understand, Hartley said finally, that Garrett and his partners have considerable influence. They've spent 2 years painting you as a radical, possibly an anarchist, certainly a murderer. Challenging that narrative won't be easy. I'm not asking for easy, Ash said, just for truth. Hartley smiled thinly. Truth is a luxury in politics, Mr. Black, but justice. Sometimes we can manage justice. He stood. There'll be a hearing. Public, that's your best protection. Garrett won't be able to make you disappear with the whole city watching. Can you find more witnesses, men who worked the mine? Families of the victims? Give us time, Santos said. They'll come forward. They've been waiting for someone to listen. They left with a date 2 weeks hence and a mixture of hope and dread. The hotel felt confining after the meeting, so they walked, ending up in a small park where nursemaids watched children play. 2 weeks, Naomi said. Enough time for Garrett to marshal his forces. Or for us to marshal ours. Ash watched a boy chase pigeons, scattering them in gray clouds. I need to visit Rachel's grave. Will you come? The cemetery was on the outskirts of the city, newer than the one in Pine Hollow, but already filling with Denver's ambitious dead. Rachel's stone was simple, her name. Dates. Beloved sister. I used the last of my money for it. Ash said, before I ran, couldn't leave her in a pauper's field. He knelt, pulled weeds that had grown around the base. Naomi stood back, letting him have this moment with his past. When he finally rose, his eyes were wet but clear. She would have liked you, he said. Would have scolded me for taking so long to propose properly. You haven't proposed properly yet, Naomi pointed out. Just made promises in a cemetery. When this is over. No. She stopped him with a hand on his arm. Not when this is over. Not contingent on outcomes or dependent on verdicts. If you want to ask now, as we are with all our ghosts watching. There in the Denver cemetery, with the mountains rising in the distance and the city's smoke drifting overhead, Ash knelt again this time before the living. Naomi Bell, you saved my life and gave me a new one. You showed me that running leaves you nowhere, but standing still in the right place can be everything. Will you marry me, not Beaumont Black, but Ash, the man you named and made whole? Yes, she said simply. Yes to Ash, to the garden in Pine Hollow, to whatever comes next. Yes. He stood and kissed her, there among the graves, sealing their future against the past. When they finally parted, both were crying and laughing in equal measure. Now, Naomi said, wiping her eyes with characteristic practicality. Let's go find those witnesses. We have a trial to win and a life to get back to. They walked back toward the city hand in hand, leaving Rachel's grave peaceful in the afternoon sun. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal. Ahead, Denver's challenges waited. But for this moment, they were simply two people who'd chosen each other despite everything, or perhaps because of it. The real fight would come soon enough, but they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. The Denver courthouse stood like a monument to justice, or the appearance of it. Ash adjusted his borrowed collar for the third time as they climbed the stone steps. Beside him, Naomi wore her best dress, a deep blue that made her look like respectability itself, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her small purse. "Steady," he murmured. "I should be telling you that," she replied, but squeezed his arm in gratitude. The hearing room was already half full despite the early hour. Word had spread through the mining communities, and men with weathered faces and worn clothes filled the back benches. In the front rows sat Denver's quality men in fine suits, women in feathered hats, all come to see the spectacle. And there, at the plaintiff's table, sat Harrison Garrett himself. Ash hadn't seen him since that night 2 years ago when Garrett had threatened to destroy him if he didn't approve the blast. The mine owner looked older, his hair more silver than brown, but his eyes held the same cold calculation. "Mr. Black," Prosecutor Hartley gestured to a chair. "Miss Bell, there's a seat just behind." "She stays with me," Ash said firmly. Hartley raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "As you wish." The judge entered Horace Pemberton, a man with a reputation for fairness when politics allowed. The room rose, then settled like birds after a disturbance. "We're here," Judge Pemberton began, "to examine new evidence regarding the Garrett mine disaster of 1880. This is not a criminal trial yet, but an inquiry to determine if charges should be filed or existing warrants dismissed." He peered over his spectacles at both tables. "I expect civility and truth. Proceed, Mr. Hartley." The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, we've uncovered evidence suggesting that Beaumont Black, far from causing the mine collapse, tried to prevent it. We'll show that the real negligence lay with the mine's owners, who prioritized profit over safety." Garrett's lawyer, a smooth-faced man named Whitman, stood immediately. "Objection. Mr. Black is a fugitive who fled after 30 men died. Any evidence he's produced now is supported by testimony from witnesses with no reason to lie," Hartley interrupted. "Your Honor, we'd like to call James Santos." Jim took the stand, hat in hand but spine straight. Under Hartley's questioning, he laid out the truth, the surveys showing instability, Garrett's pressure to blast anyway, Ash's attempts to minimize the danger. "Mr. Black modified those charges at risk to himself," Jim said. "If he'd followed orders exactly, the whole mountain might have come down. He saved lives that day, even if he couldn't save them all." Whitman cross-examined viciously, trying to paint Jim as a disgruntled employee, a foreigner with a grudge. But Jim held firm, his dignity unshakable. "I've been a mining foreman for 15 years, he said when Whitman suggested he didn't understand the technical aspects. "I've set more charges than you've signed papers. I know dangerous when I see it. And I know courage too." Beaumont Black had both the knowledge and the guts to stand against men who thought money mattered more than lives. Next came the families, one by one. Widows and sons and brothers testified about warnings ignored, safety equipment denied, shifts extended beyond exhaustion. Mrs. O'Malley, whose husband had died in the collapse, spoke with quiet devastation about his fears. "Patrick said the mountain talked at night, said it groaned like something dying. He wanted to quit, but we had 3 little ones and no other work." She looked directly at Garrett. "You knew it was dangerous. You all knew." The morning wore on. Garrett sat stone-faced as the evidence mounted, occasionally whispering to Whitman. Ash watched it all with a strange detachment, as if viewing someone else's life. Only Naomi's presence beside him felt real. Then Whitman called his first witness. "We call Dr. Marcus Pellman." Ash stiffened. Pellman had been the company doctor, the one who'd signed death certificates and health clearances with equal disregard for truth. "Dr. Pellman," Whitman began smoothly. "You treated Mr. Black's sister, Rachel, did you not?" "I did." Pellman's voice was reedy, nervous. She suffered from consumption. Very advanced case. And Mr. Black was desperate to pay for her care. Objection, Hartley said. Relevance. Goes to motive, Your Honor. Whitman replied, We'll show that Mr. Black, faced with mounting medical bills, took bribes from competing mines to sabotage the Garrett operation. The room erupted in murmurs. Judge Pemberton banged his gavel. You'll need proof of such accusations. Mr. Whitman. Of course. Whitman produced a ledger. Dr. Pellman, is this your record of payments received? As Pellman confirmed the ledger's authenticity, Ash leaned toward Naomi. Those are forged entries. I know, she whispered back. Don't react. That's what they want. Whitman continued building his case, painting Ash as a desperate man who'd sold out for silver. Other witnesses followed a clerk who claimed to have seen Ash meeting with rival mine owners, a supplier who swore Ash had asked about purchasing extra explosives. By noon, the momentum had shifted. The crowd murmured uneasily. Even some of the miners looked uncertain. Judge Pemberton called for a recess. In the hallway, Hartley pulled Ash aside. They've prepared well. These witnesses are lying, Ash said flatly. Can you prove it? Before Ash could answer, Naomi spoke up. What about Rachel's letters? Both men turned to her. You mentioned once that she wrote to you from the sanatorium. Did you keep them? Ash's eyes widened. They were in my apartment, but after I fled. Jim! Naomi called. Santos approached quickly. That landlady on Larimer Street, the one who liked you. Would she have kept Ash's belongings? Jim's weathered face split into a grin. Mrs. Chen. That woman keeps everything. Claims she's still waiting for tenants from 10 years back to pay their rent. Go, Hartley said urgently. Court resumes in an hour. Jim left at a run. Naomi turned to Ash. What would the letters prove? Rachel mentioned the mine in them. Mentioned my arguments with Garrett, my fears about safety. She was proud that I stood up to them. His voice caught. Said I was just like our father, too stubborn for my own good. The hour passed slowly. The crowd reassembled, buzzing with speculation. Garrett looked confident now, whispering with other well-dressed men who joined him. Jim burst through the doors just as Judge Pemberton raised his gavel. In his hands was a small wooden box. Your Honor, Hartley said quickly, new evidence has just arrived. May we examine it? Pemberton nodded. Ash opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of letters in Rachel's careful script, along with other papers, his original survey reports, copies of safety recommendations, even a telegram from the territorial inspector supporting his concerns. Hey, Mrs. Chen never throws anything away, Jim said with satisfaction. Hartley scanned the letters quickly, then smiled. Your Honor, we'd like to recall Mr. Black to the stand. For the next hour, Ash read from Rachel's letters, her words, written in the formal yet affectionate tone of a devoted sister, painted a clear picture, a brother fighting for miners' safety, threatening to quit rather than approve dangerous blasting, seeking any way to protect the men while keeping his job to pay for her care. Dearest Beaumont, he read, voice steady despite the pain. I told you to take Garrett's money and approve whatever he wanted. What's 30 miners compared to your sister's life? But you said every man in that mine has a sister or mother or wife who loves him. You said you couldn't trade their grief for my health. I'm proud of you, even as I fear for what these powerful men might do to someone who defies them. The room was silent when he finished. Even Garrett had the grace to look uncomfortable. There's more, Hartley said. He produced the telegram from the territorial inspector. This confirms that Mr. Black filed formal safety complaints 2 weeks before the blast. Complaints that were never investigated because, he looked at Garrett, certain parties had influence with the territorial government. Whitman tried to rally. He suggested the letters were forged, the reports falsified, but the tide had turned. When Mrs. Chen herself took the stand, a tiny Chinese woman who spoke precise English and brooked no nonsense from Whitman, she confirmed keeping everything exactly as Ash had left it. "He was good tenant," she said firmly. "Paid on time, no trouble. When he didn't come back, I kept his things. In China, we say a man's possessions wait for him like faithful dogs. Also, he owed 2 weeks' rent." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Judge Pemberton himself smiled. The final testimony came from an unexpected source. Thomas Brennan, not Naomi's lost fiancé, but his cousin. Also a firefighter who'd come from Montana. "I heard about this hearing," he said. "Heard Miss Bell was involved. She saved my cousin's life once. Gave him 2 extra years before the fire took him. If she says this man is worth defending, that's enough for me. But more than that, I've fought fires in mines. I know what happens when owners cut corners. The Garrett mine collapse. That wasn't the first, won't be the last. But maybe if one man stands up and tells the truth, if one owner faces consequences, maybe it saves lives down the road." When testimony concluded, Judge Pemberton retired to consider. The weight felt eternal. Naomi held Ash's hand under the table, both of them beyond caring about propriety. Finally, the judge returned. "This hearing has revealed troubling facts about the Garrett mine disaster. While I cannot undo the tragedy or bring back the 30 souls lost, I can address the injustice done to Beaumont Black." He looked at Ash. "All warrants for your arrest are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, I'm recommending that the territorial prosecutor investigate Harrison Garrett and his partners for criminal negligence." The room exploded. Miners cheered. Garrett's supporters protested. In the chaos, Garrett himself pushed through the crowd to where Ash stood. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "I still have influence, money, power. You're nothing but an engineer without a job, a man with no future in this territory." "He has something you'll never have," Naomi said, stepping between them. "A clean conscience, and a home waiting for him, where people judge a man by his actions, not his bank account." Garrett's face purpled, but Whitman pulled him away. The threat lingered in the air like smoke. "He's right about one thing," Ash said quietly. "I'll never work in mining again, not in Colorado." "Good," Naomi said firmly. "Pine Hollow needs a school teacher more than another engineer, someone who can read, write, do figures, someone patient enough to handle farm children and miners' sons." Ash stared at her. "A school teacher? Why not? You've been teaching me about surveying and mathematics these past months. You're good at it." She smiled. "Besides, it's steady work, respectable, the kind of job a married man should have." Judge Pemberton, passing by, overheard. "Miss Bell makes a good point, and if you need a recommendation, I'd be happy to provide one. Colorado's loss can be Pine Hollow's gain." As they left the courthouse, Denver's afternoon sun seemed brighter than when they'd entered. The shadows that had haunted Ash for 2 years were lifting, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten: hope. "It's over," he said wonderingly. "No," Naomi corrected, linking her arm through his. "It's beginning." Behind them, the courthouse doors closed on Beaumont Black's past. Ahead, the road led back to Pine Hollow, to their garden, to the life they'd chosen together. Justice had been served, imperfectly but truly. And sometimes, that was miracle enough. The stage from Denver rolled into Pine Hollow just as the sun touched the mountains, painting Main Street in shades of gold and shadow. Naomi pressed her face to the window, surprised by how much the sight of the ramshackle buildings made her heart lift. Home, when had this dusty town become home? But as they descended from the coach, it became clear that news had traveled faster than they had. Small clusters of townspeople stood along the street, watching. Not the warm welcome she'd hoped for, but something more complex: curiosity mixed with suspicion, interest shadowed by judgment. "Well, Mrs." Morrison said, approaching with her usual directness. "The whole town's been talking. Some say you went to Denver to marry. Others say Mr. Ash here was on trial for murder." "The second, not the first," Ash said calmly, "though we plan to remedy that soon enough." "Mrs.?" Morrison's eyebrows climbed. "So it's true about the mine, the 30 men?" "It's true that 30 men died," Naomi interjected. "It's also true that Ash tried to prevent it and was blamed by the real culprits. The court in Denver cleared his name." "Courts?" Dr. Holcomb had wandered over, surprisingly steady on his feet. "They say whatever rich men pay them to say." "Sometimes," Ash agreed. "But sometimes they tell the truth, when enough people demand it." An uncomfortable silence fell. Then Timothy Morrison pushed through the crowd. "Miss Bell, did you bring me anything from Denver?" The child's innocent question broke the tension. Naomi smiled. "As a matter of fact, I did." She produced a small bag of peppermint sticks. "For you and your sisters." As Timothy ran off with his treasure, others began to approach. Some offered tentative welcomes, others just stared. But beneath it all, Naomi sensed something shifting the town's judgment balanced against their need for her skills. Their suspicion of Ash weighed against their memory of his months of quiet help. It was the sheriff who finally voiced what others were thinking. "Glad you're back, Miss Bell. The Hendricks baby took fever while you were gone. Doc Holcomb did his best, but—" He shrugged apologetically at the doctor, who just nodded. "I'll go see them directly," Naomi said. "After you've settled in," the sheriff continued, turning to Ash. "As for you, I don't care what you were called in Denver or what you did there. In Pine Hollow, you're the man who fixed Widow Carmichael's roof and helped bring in the Garrett harvest when John broke his leg. That's all that matters to the law here." Not everyone agreed. As they made their way to Naomi's cabin, they passed knots of people who turned away, whispers following in their wake. One woman, Mrs. Pritchard, wife of the bank manager, actually crossed the street to avoid them. "It's starting already," Naomi said quietly as they reached the cabin. Ash set down their bags, turned to study her. "Having second thoughts. About you, never. About them." She gestured toward town. "I knew it would be hard. A woman who went unchaperoned to Denver with a man, stood by him in court, admitted to being engaged without the proper courtship period. We could leave," Ash suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else." "No," Naomi's voice was firm. "I've run once. So have you. We're done with that." They spent the evening settling back in, finding everything much as they'd left it. Jim Santos had stayed an extra day to tend the garden, and green shoots pushed through the soil in neat rows. The chicken coop stood half-finished, waiting for their return. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ash said, "The sheriff mentioned something about me being the man who helped with the Garrett harvest. Any relation to, No relation to Harrison Garrett," Naomi said quickly. "John Garrett's a good man, farmer outside town, has 7 children and a bad back." She paused. "Though now that you mention it, there'll be talk about the name. People making connections that aren't there." Let them talk. But talk they did, over the next days. Pine Hollow divided into camps. There were those who stood by Naomi, mostly the people she'd helped over the years, the ones who knew the value of having a skilled healer regardless of her personal choices. They made a point of greeting her on the street, of asking after her trip, of treating Ash with cautious respect. Then there were the others, the respectable folk who'd always disapproved of Naomi's independence and now had ammunition for their whispers, the wives who clutched their husbands' arms a little tighter when Ash passed, the merchants who served them with cold courtesy and nothing more. The breaking point came on Sunday. Naomi and Ash attended church, a statement in itself, claiming their place in the community. Reverend Dawson welcomed them warmly, but the congregation's reaction was mixed. Some nodded greeting, others pointedly looked away. The Pritchards actually rose and moved when Naomi sat in the pew behind them. After the service, as people gathered outside, Mrs. Pritchard's voice carried clearly. "I don't care what any court says. No decent woman travels alone with a man like that. And now they're living in sin, bold as brass." "We're engaged," Naomi said, stepping forward. "And Ash has taken a room at the boarding house until we're married." "Engaged?" Mrs. Pritchard's laugh was ugly. "Without her father's permission, oh wait, she doesn't have one. Without proper introduction to society, just a convenient arrangement after their Denver adventure." "That's enough, Eleanor." "Mrs. Morrison said unexpectedly. "Judge not lest ye be judged. Isn't that what the Reverend just preached?" "Don't quote scripture at me, Sarah Morrison. You're only defending her because she saved your life. But what about our daughters? What example does this set?" "An example of loyalty," a new voice said. Mrs. Garrett John's wife, heavily pregnant with her 8th child, pushed through the crowd. "An example of standing by someone when the whole world's against them. Seems to me that's exactly what the Bible teaches." The crowd stirred uneasily. Lines were being drawn, and everyone could feel it. "You'd defend a murderer's woman, Mr." Pritchard had joined his wife, chest puffed with indignation. "I'd defend the woman who sat with me through 3 days of labor last year when Doc Holcomb was too drunk to come." "Mrs." Garrett shot back. "The woman who's never asked for more than we could pay, who's treated minors and merchants with equal care. As for Mr. Ash or Mr. Black or whoever he is, my John says he's the best hand he's ever had at harvest. Works hard, doesn't complain, doesn't drink. That's more than I can say for some." Her pointed look at Dr. Holcomb, swaying slightly by the church steps, made several people chuckle despite the tension. Reverend Dawson stepped in before things could escalate further. "Perhaps we should remember that this is the Lord's Day, a day for forgiveness, not judgment." But the damage was done. As Naomi and Ash walked home, they could feel the town's eyes on them, some sympathetic, some hostile, all watchful. "I'm sorry," Ash said once they were alone. "This is my fault, my past." "Our present," Naomi corrected. "And our future. Let them whisper. They whispered when I first arrived too. That strange woman from Montana who thinks she's a doctor. But when their children burned with fever, they knocked on my door quick enough." She was right. Over the next week, even as the social freeze continued, people still sought her medical help. Mrs. Pritchard might cross the street to avoid her, but when the Pritchard's maid cut her hand badly, it was Naomi who stitched it up. Ash, meanwhile, approached the school board about the teaching position. The board, 3 farmers, and Mr. Henderson, who ran the general store, received him with varying degrees of skepticism. "You're educated, that's clear," Henderson said, reviewing the recommendation from Judge Pemberton. "But there's the matter of influence." "You mean whether I'll corrupt the children with radical ideas?" Ash's voice was dry. "Some parents have expressed concerns." Another board member admitted, "About your background, the accusations. We're proven false. I have the court documents if you'd like to see them." "It's not about proof," Henderson said uncomfortably. "It's about perception. Parents need to trust the man teaching their children." "Then let them meet me," Ash suggested. "Hold a town meeting. Let me answer their questions directly." The board exchanged glances. It was an unusual request, but these were unusual circumstances. The meeting was set for Thursday evening in the church. Word spread quickly, and by the appointed time, the building was packed. Naomi sat in the front row, chin high despite the whispers around her. Ash stood before them without notes or pretense. He told his story, simply his work as an engineer, his attempts to ensure safety, Rachel's death, the false accusations, his flight to Pine Hollow. He answered every question, no matter how hostile or personal. "Why should we trust you with our children?" one father demanded. "Because I know what it's like to fail to protect people," Ash replied. 30 men died because I couldn't stop powerful men from putting profit over lives. I'll never let harm come to anyone in my care again. What about your radical ideas? We heard you supported the mining unions. I supported safety regulations. If that's radical, then yes, I'm radical. I believe every worker deserves to come home alive to his family. Young Timothy Morrison raised his hand. Will you teach us about mines and mountains and how to build things? Despite the tension, Ash smiled. If the board allows it, yes, real-world applications of mathematics and science. The questions continued for 2 hours. Some people left convinced, others skeptical. But when the board voted the next day, it was 3-1 in favor of hiring him. Probationary basis, Henderson warned. Any trouble, any complaints, and you're gone. Understood. That weekend, Pine Hollow held its spring dance. Naomi and Ash attended another statement, another claim on their place in the community. Some couples gave them wide berth on the dance floor. Others nodded politely. A few the Garretts, the Morrisons. Surprisingly, the sheriff and his wife actually spoke with them. It'll take time, the sheriff's wife said quietly to Naomi. People don't like their assumptions challenged, but you're good for this town. Both of you. Don't let the Eleanor Pritchards drive you away. During a break in the music, Reverend Dawson approached. I've been thinking, he said, about weddings, specifically yours. I'd be honored to perform the ceremony whenever you're ready. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. It was the first truly welcoming thing anyone in authority had said since their return. Soon, Ash said, taking her hand. Very soon. As they danced carefully, properly. Aware of watching eyes, Naomi realized something. The whispers hadn't stopped. The judgment remained. But it was quieter now, less certain. For every person who turned away, another nodded greeting. For every door that closed, another cracked open. We're winning, she murmured against Ash's shoulder. Are we? Yes, slowly, carefully. But yes, they can't ignore what you did at the hearing. Can't pretend I haven't saved half their lives at some point. Eventually, they'll have to choose between their prejudice and their need. And if they choose prejudice, she pulled back to look at him, then we'll still have each other, and our garden, and the children you'll teach who'll grow up knowing the truth matters more than whispers. The music ended, but they stayed in each other's arms a moment longer, claiming their space in the center of Pine Hollow's judgment. Around them, the town watched and whispered and slowly, reluctantly, began to accept that some changes, like spring itself, were inevitable. The nightmare came on a cold April night, 3 weeks after their return from Denver. Naomi woke to the sound of Ash thrashing in his room at the boarding house next door, his cries carrying through the thin walls and across the narrow alley between buildings. Get them out, the support beams. Rachel, no. She threw on her shawl and hurried outside, not caring about propriety. Mrs. Olson, the boarding house owner, was already in the hallway wringing her hands when Naomi arrived. He's been at it near an hour, the older woman whispered. Woke half the house. Mr. Pritchard's threatening to complain to the sheriff. Let me through, Naomi said firmly. She found Ash tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, eyes closed but face contorted in anguish. His hands clawed at invisible rocks, and when she touched his shoulder, he jerked away violently. The mountain's coming down, he gasped. Can't stop it, can't save them. Rachel, please. Ash, she gripped his shoulders firmly. You're in Pine Hollow. You're safe. Wake up. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment he didn't seem to recognize her. Then reality crashed back, and he crumpled forward, breathing hard. I was there again, he whispered. In the mine. But this time Rachel was inside with the men. I had to choose save her or save them. I couldn't do both. I couldn't. Shh. Naomi pulled him against her shoulder, feeling him shake. It's over. It's all over. But they both knew it wasn't. The trial had cleared his name, but it couldn't erase the memories, couldn't bring back the dead, couldn't silence the what-ifs that haunted him. Mrs. Olson appeared in the doorway with a lamp. "Everything all right?" "Just a bad dream," Naomi said. "Could you bring some water, please?" The landlady hesitated. "Miss Bell, it ain't proper. You being here at this hour?" "Then I'll make it proper by staying until dawn," Naomi said sharply. "Unless you'd prefer to deal with him yourself next time." Mrs. Olson retreated, returning with water and the news that Mr. Pritchard was indeed complaining loudly about harboring lunatics. "I should leave," Ash said when they were alone again. "Find somewhere else." "No," Naomi pressed the glass into his hands. "We knew this would happen. The memories don't just disappear because a judge says you're innocent. It's getting worse, not better. What if I have one of these episodes while teaching? What if the children..." "The children will learn that their teacher is human, that he carries scars from trying to do right in a world that often rewards wrong." She studied his face in the lamplight. "How long since you really slept? Not just dozed, but truly rested?" He laughed bitterly. "Denver, the night after the hearing, when I knew I wouldn't wake up in shackles. Since we've been back," he shrugged. "You're listening for them, for Pinkerton's men or Garrett's hired thugs. Aren't you?" She couldn't deny it. They'd both been waiting for retaliation, for Harrison Garrett to make good on his threats. The very normalcy of their return had felt like the calm before a storm. "Come on," she said, making a decision. "Get dressed." "Naomi, it's 3 a.m. "Exactly. No one will see us, and you need to remember why you're fighting to stay here." 20 minutes later, they stood in the garden behind her cabin. Moonlight silvered the neat rows of vegetables, the new growth pushing up through dark soil. The half-built chicken coop cast geometric shadows. "When you can't sleep," Naomi said, "when the nightmares come, remember this. What we're building, it's small compared to a mine. I know, but..." "It's not small." Ash knelt, running soil through his fingers. "It's everything. Life instead of death. Growing instead of taking." He looked up at her. "I dream about Rachel. But I also dream about this, about summers here with you, harvests and seasons and ordinary days. Is that wrong? To want something so simple when 30 families are still grieving?" "It's not wrong to want life, Ash. Those men would want the same if they could." They stayed in the garden until dawn pinked the eastern sky. When they finally parted properly, at her front door where anyone could see something had shifted, the haunting remained. But alongside it was determination. The next evening brought an unexpected visitor. Jim Santos arrived just as Naomi was finishing her rounds, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Trouble," he said without preamble. "Garrett's making moves. He's hired new Pinkertons, meaner than the last bunch. Word is they're not coming to arrest you this time." Ash set down the school primer he'd been reviewing. "How long?" "Week, maybe 2. My sources aren't sure. But Garrett's angry about the investigation in Denver. Blames you for turning public opinion against him." Jim accepted the cup of coffee Naomi offered. "You could run. I know places." "No." Ash's voice was firm. "I'm done running." "Then you'd better be ready to fight. And not just you, anyone close to you." His eyes flicked to Naomi. "I can take care of myself," she said quietly. "Against hired killers, Senora. Forgive me, but..." "I've been taking care of myself since I was 17. Naomi interrupted. "My father thought teaching me to shoot was unwomanly, so I taught myself after he died. I can hit a medicine bottle at 50 paces. As for the rest, I know every family in this town. Their secrets, their ailments, their debts to me. If Garrett wants a fight, he'll find this ground less favorable than he thinks." Jim looked between them, then smiled slowly. "You picked well. Jefe, all right. If you're staying, you'll need friends. I'll spread the word among the mining camps. Men remember who stood for safety and who got them killed. They'll come if called." After Jim left, Ash and Naomi sat in heavy silence. Finally, she spoke. "We should marry now, before they come." "Naomi, I won't have them using propriety against us. Won't give the Pritchards ammunition about living in sin. If we're married, I have legal rights. Can speak for you if—" She stopped, unable to voice the possibility. "You'd marry me now with killers possibly days away." "I'd marry you in the middle of a stampede if necessary," she said fiercely. "But I'd prefer Reverend Dawson's church, with whatever friends we have as witnesses." They were married 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon with no fanfare. The Garretts stood as witnesses, along with Mrs. Morrison, Jim Santos, and, surprisingly, Sheriff Watson and his wife, Mrs. Olson, came, muttering about losing a boarder but smiling through her complaints. Even Dr. Holcomb attended, sober and bearing a wedding gift, a medical text he'd kept from his younger, more idealistic days. "I might need 2 healers in this town," he said gruffly. "Case I'm too drunk to help. Your man's got steady hands and a good head. Could teach him some basics." Naomi wore her blue dress. Ash had found a proper suit somewhere. Reverend Dawson performed the ceremony with quiet dignity, speaking of love that endured trials and commitment that faced down fear. "Do you, Beaumont, Ash, take this woman?" "I do," Ash said, using the name Naomi had given him, the name of his resurrection. When they kissed, sealing their union, applause echoed through the small church. Not the whole town's approval, but enough. A beginning. That night, in the cabin that was now officially their home, they didn't speak of the threat looming over them. Instead, they talked of ordinary things, plans for the school term, expanding the garden, finally finishing the chicken coop. They went to bed as married people do, finding comfort and strength in each other. But Ash woke again in the dark hours, Rachel's name on his lips. This time, though, Naomi was there, not across an alley but beside him, her presence real and grounding. "Tell me about her," she said. "Not the nightmares. Tell me who she was when she was alive." So he did. Told her about the sister who'd raised him after their parents died, who'd insisted he get an education even when it meant she worked as a seamstress until her fingers bled, who'd loved wildflowers and bad jokes and dancing, who'd fought her illness with the same stubbornness she'd brought to everything else. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "Would have scolded me for taking so long to propose properly." "You still haven't proposed properly," Naomi pointed out. "Just promised and married me. I'm still waiting for you to get on one knee with flowers and pretty words." "After," he promised. "When this is over, when we're just a school teacher and a nurse in a small town, I'll do it right." "I'll hold you to that." They lay quiet, listening to night sounds, wind in the eaves, a distant owl, the settling of the house around them. Then Naomi spoke again. "The dreams won't stop. You know that. The memories will always be there." "I know. But we'll face them together. Every nightmare, every accusation, every threat, together." "Together," he agreed. Outside, Pine Hollow slept uneasily. Word of Jim's warning had spread, and those who supported the couple kept weapons close. Those who didn't whispered that they'd brought trouble to a peaceful town. But in the cabin at the edge of town, 2 people held each other against the darkness, both the kind that came with night and the kind that came with memory. They'd chosen each other, chosen this place, chosen to stand rather than run. The mountain had fallen once, taking 30 souls with it, but from the rubble, something new was growing, fragile as spring shoots, strong as the earth that nurtured them. Whatever came next, they would meet it with open eyes and joined hands. The nightmares would come, but so would the dawn. And in the garden behind the cabin, seeds pushed toward the surface, reaching for light. The first day of school came with a May morning so perfect it seemed to mock the tension hanging over Pine Hollow. Ash stood at the door of the one-room schoolhouse, watching children arrive in groups, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. "Morning, Mr. Ash," Timothy Morrison called out, leading his sisters by the hand. "Good morning, Timothy, Sarah, little Mary." He'd made a point of learning every child's name beforehand, visiting families despite cool receptions, demonstrating his commitment. The Pritchard boys arrived last, their mother watching from across the street with pursed lips. She'd fought against his appointment to the end, but even she couldn't deny her son's needed education, and the nearest other school was 15 miles away. "Boys," Ash nodded. "Welcome." Inside, 23 children aged 6 to 16 arranged themselves on benches, farm children mostly, with a few from town merchant families. They watched him with expressions ranging from friendly interest to suspicious reservation. "I'm not going to pretend," Ash began, standing before them, "that you haven't heard stories about me. Your parents have opinions, and that's their right. But in this classroom, we start fresh. You'll be judged on your work and your character, nothing else, and I'll earn your respect through my teaching, not demand it through fear." Young Sarah Morrison raised her hand. "Ma says you built things in Denver, big things." "I designed mines. Yes, drew plans for tunnels and supports. Would you like to learn how—" The children exchanged glances. This wasn't how school usually started. For the next hour, Ash taught mathematics through practical application. He showed them how to calculate the angle of a support beam, how to figure the amount of timber needed for construction. He had them measure the schoolroom and determine how many boards made up the floor. "But why do we need to know this?" one of the Pritchard boys, Samuel, asked. "We're going to be farmers, not engineers." "How do you plan a barn?" Ash countered. "Calculate how much seed to buy, figure the best angle for a roof to shed snow. Mathematics isn't just for engineers, it's for anyone who wants to build something that lasts." By lunchtime, he had them hooked. Even the skeptical children were leaning forward, asking questions. When they broke to eat their dinner pails outside, Ash allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. It was shattered by the arrival of Harrison Garrett. The mining magnate rode up to the schoolhouse with 2 companions, hard-faced men who stayed mounted while Garrett dismounted. The children fell silent, sensing danger the way animals sense storms. "Mr. Black," Garrett said, loud enough for all to hear. "Or whatever you're calling yourself now, teaching children. Are we how noble?" Ash stepped between Garrett and the children. "School's in session. Mr. Garrett, if you have business with me, it can wait until after hours. My business won't wait." Garrett's smile was cold. "You cost me significant money with your lies in Denver, contracts canceled, investigations launched. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Is that a threat?" "A promise. You have 1 week to leave Pine Hollow. Take your woman and go, and I'll consider us even. Stay." And he glanced meaningfully at the children. "Accidents happen. Mining towns are dangerous places." "You're threatening children now." Ash kept his voice level, but rage burned in his chest. "I'm discussing reality. These children have fathers who work in mines. Don't they, mothers who travel dangerous roads? So many possibilities for tragedy." Garrett remounted his horse. 1 week, Black. Use it wisely." After he left, the children remained frozen. Little Mary Morrison was crying silently. Samuel Pritchard looked pale but defiant. "Are you going to leave?" Timothy asked in a small voice. Ash looked at their faces, frightened, but also watching him, waiting to see what kind of man their teacher really was. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not leaving, and neither are you. We have geography this afternoon, don't we? Let's go inside and learn about mountains. Real ones, not the kind that fall on people." Word of Garrett's visit spread through Pine Hollow like wildfire. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside Ash and Naomi's cabin. Some came in support, others in anger, all in fear. "You've brought this on us," Mr. Pritchard accused. "Garrett owns half the territory. He could destroy this town." "He owns mines, not towns," Sheriff Watson said, "and threatening children crosses a line. What are you going to do about it? Someone called. Arrest him with what army? The argument escalated, voices rising. Naomi watched from the doorway as neighbor turned on neighbor, fear fracturing the community. Enough, she finally shouted. You want to know what Garrett can do? He can divide us, turn us against each other, make us weak. That's what he's counting on, that we'll sacrifice our own to save ourselves. Easy for you to say. Mrs., Pritchard snapped. Your husband's the target. Our families are just collateral damage. Your families have been collateral damage for years, Ash said, stepping beside Naomi. Every unsafe mine, every corner cut for profit, every widow made for the sake of silver. The only difference is now you can see the threat clearly. Old man Henderson, who'd lost 2 sons in mining accidents over the years, spoke up. Boy's got a point. Garrett and his like have been bleeding us dry for decades. Maybe it's time we bled back. With what? Pritchard demanded. Good intentions, righteous anger. He has money, men, influence. He has fear. Jim Santos interrupted, appearing at the edge of the crowd. That's why he came here personal. Man like Garrett doesn't dirty his hands unless he's worried. Behind Jim stood a group of miners, rough men with scarred hands and hard eyes. Men who remembered the Garrett mine collapse, who'd lost friends and brothers. Word spread through the camps. Jim continued. About what's happening here. About a teacher who stood up for safety in a town that might stand with him. We've come to even the odds. The crowd stirred uneasily. These weren't hired guns but working men, tired of being expendable. This isn't your fight, someone said. Isn't it? A miner stepped forward, Jose Martinez, who'd worked the Garrett mine. My brother died in that collapse. Garrett said it was an accident, unavoidable. Now I learned this man tried to prevent it, got blamed for it. That makes it my fight. Through the evening, more arrived. Not an army, but enough to make Garrett's threats less certain. They made camp outside town, visible but not threatening, a reminder that Pine Hollow wasn't as isolated as Garrett might have thought. That night, as Ash and Naomi lay wakeful, she said, They're risking everything for us. Not for us. For the idea that someone can stand up to men like Garrett and survive. Can we survive? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, but running now would make every accusation true. Would tell those children that power always wins, that courage is just another word for foolishness. Then we stay. We stay. The next morning, every child returned to school, even the Pritchard boys, though their mother watched from across the street all day. Ash taught as if nothing had changed, but he noticed how the older boys stayed close during recess, how the children walked home in groups. On the 3rd day, Naomi found a note under their door, leave or she dies first. The handwriting was crude, the threat clear. They're trying to frighten us, she said, though her hands shook as she burned the note. It's working, Ash admitted. If anything happens to you. Nothing will happen to me. She checked the load in the rifle she now kept by the door. I'm not Rachel. Ash, I'm not defenseless, and I'm not alone. She was right. The women of Pine Hollow, those who supported them, had quietly organized. They traveled in groups, watched each other's houses, made sure Naomi was never isolated on her rounds. Mrs. Garrett, pregnant and fierce, appointed herself Naomi's unofficial bodyguard. Let them try something, she said, patting the pistol in her apron pocket. 7 children teach you to defend what's yours. The week crawled by. Garrett's men were seen around town watching, waiting. The miners remained camped outside town also watching, also waiting. Pine Hollow held its breath. On the 6th night, Ash woke to Rachel's voice, but this time, the dream was different. She wasn't in the mine, wasn't dying. She stood in their garden, surrounded by growing things. You did it, she said, smiling. You found a way to build instead of destroy. I'm proud of you, brother. He woke with tears on his face, but peace in his heart. Beside him, Naomi stirred. Bad dream. Good one, for once. He pulled her close. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm glad for this. For you, for the children, for the chance to try. We're going to win, she said firmly. Not because we're stronger or richer or meaner. Because we're right, and sometimes not always. But sometimes that's enough. Dawn came gray and uncertain, matching the town's mood. Ash dressed carefully, as if for church or court. Naomi pinned her hair severely, loaded her medical bag with supplies for treating wounds. They walked to the schoolhouse together, through streets that were either empty or too full of watching eyes. The children were already there, gathered inside as if the building could protect them, whatever happens. Ash told them, "Remember what you've learned, not just mathematics and reading, but that standing up for what's right is worth the risk. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it." Samuel Pritchard raised his hand. "Our ma says you're a fool." "Maybe I am," Ash admitted. "But I'd rather be a fool who tried than a wise man who didn't." Through the window, they could see riders approaching. Garrett's promised consequence, arriving with the 7th dawn. But they could see something else too, the miners moving in from their camp, the townspeople emerging from buildings, even Mrs. Pritchard stepping into the street with her husband's hunting rifle. Pine Hollow was choosing sides, and the balance was tipping. "Children," Ash said calmly. "Let's begin with history. Today's lesson, how ordinary people change the world." Outside, the future galloped closer. Inside, a teacher taught and children learned. And for that moment, at least, hope was winning. The confrontation came not with gunfire, but with paper. Harrison Garrett rode into Pine Hollow that 7th morning with a dozen men, but also with a man in a city suit carrying a leather portfolio. They stopped in the center of Main Street, where the miners and townspeople had gathered. "I've brought a federal marshal," Garrett announced, gesturing to the suited man, "with warrants for Beaumont Black's arrest on charges of sedition, inciting violence, and disrupting lawful commerce." The crowd stirred angrily. Sheriff Watson stepped forward. "Let me see those warrants." The federal marshal, a thin man named Dorsey, handed over the papers with obvious reluctance, while Watson read. Garrett smiled coldly at Ash, who stood on the schoolhouse steps with Naomi. "You thought a territorial judge's ruling would protect you. I have friends in Washington, federal friends." "These charges are fabricated," Watson said, looking up from the papers. "Sedition for telling the truth about unsafe mining practices." "That's for a federal court to decide," Marshal Dorsey said. "I'm here to serve these warrants and transport the prisoner to Denver." "The hell you are," Jose Martinez growled, stepping forward with the other miners. "We know what happens to prisoners who cross men like Garrett. They never make it to trial." "Are you threatening a federal officer?" Dorsey asked nervously. "We're protecting a citizen from false arrest," Jim Santos said calmly. "Big difference." The tension stretched taut. Garrett's hired men had hands on their weapons. The miners stood firm. In between, the townspeople waited to see which way the wind would blow. Then Naomi stepped forward, medical bag in hand. "Marshal Dorsey," she said clearly, "before you take my husband anywhere, perhaps you'd like to explain why a federal marshal is doing the bidding of a private citizen. How much did Garrett pay for those warrants?" "How dare you?" "I dare because I've documented everything." She pulled out a sheaf of papers. Every threat, every bribe attempt, every suspicious accident in Garrett's mines over the past 5 years. Statements from witnesses. Medical reports on injured miners that were suppressed. Did you know falsifying federal warrants is a crime, Marshal? Dorsey paled. "I'm simply serving papers issued by Judge Cornelius Blackwood." "I see." Naomi smiled coldly. "Interesting. The same judge who owns shares in 3 of Garrett's mines. The same judge currently under investigation for corruption. Did he mention that when he signed these warrants?" The crowd murmured. This was news to most of them. "You're lying," Garrett snarled. Am I? Naomi turned to address the crowd. For 2 years I've been treating injuries, delivering babies, sitting with the dying. People tell nurses things, they trust us with secrets, and I write everything down. She held up her documentation. Every payoff to a safety inspector, every widow threatened into silence, every report buried, names, dates, amounts. Mr. Garrett, you've been so focused on my husband, you forgot about me. It doesn't matter, Garrett said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. The warrants are legal. No, a new voice interrupted. They're not. Everyone turned to see Judge Pemberton from Denver riding up with several companions, including Prosecutor Hartley. Judge Pemberton, Marshal Dorsey looked confused. What are you doing here? Preventing a miscarriage of justice. Pemberton dismounted, pulling out his own papers. I have here a federal injunction against these warrants, signed by a circuit judge who isn't on Garrett's payroll. Also, warrants for Harrison Garrett's arrest on charges of conspiracy, bribery of federal officials, and 30 counts of negligent homicide. The street erupted. Garrett's men reached for weapons, but stopped as they realized they were vastly outnumbered. The miners pressed closer, years of anger finally finding focus. You can't do this, Garrett said, but his voice had lost its power. You own nothing here, Ash said, stepping forward. Not anymore. What followed was almost anticlimactic. Marshal Dorsey, realizing he'd been used, agreed to serve Pemberton's warrants instead. Garrett, faced with arrest, tried to run. It was Mrs. Pritchard, of all people, who stopped him, stepping into his path with her rifle raised. My cousin died in your mine in 78 inches, she said quietly. Told myself it wasn't your fault, just bad luck. But it was. Wasn't it, all those deaths, all that suffering, just for silver? Garrett was taken into custody, along with 2 of his men who'd been named in the warrants. The rest scattered, unwilling to fight for a man whose power had evaporated. As the dust settled, Judge Pemberton approached Ash and Naomi. Your wife's letters reached the right people, he said. The corruption investigation was already underway, but her documentation provided the final evidence needed. Garrett's empire is finished. Will it stick? Ash asked. Men like him have ways of escaping justice. Not this time. Too many eyes watching. Too much evidence. The federal prosecutor wants to make an example. Pemberton smiled grimly. Turns out, endangering minors plays poorly in Washington right now. Something about labor unrest and political pressure. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, as if reluctant to believe it was over. Jim Santos clapped Ash on the shoulder. The miners shook his hand one by one before heading back to their camps. Even Mrs. Pritchard nodded curtly before walking away. We should get back to the children, Ash said. They'd been watching from the schoolhouse windows, and he could see their anxious faces. But Reverend Dawson intercepted them. Before you go, the town council met this morning. Before all this started, we've voted to offer you both official positions. Ash as permanent schoolmaster, and Naomi as town physician, with proper salary and recognition. Naomi's eyes filled with tears, after years of being merely tolerated, to be officially acknowledged. Also, Henderson added, joining them. We're renaming the school, the Rachel Black Memorial School, in honor of those who died trying to save others. Ash had to turn away, overcome. When he could speak again, he said simply, she would have liked that. That afternoon, Ash taught his class as if it were any other day, but the children were full of questions, excitement, and a new understanding of what their quiet teacher had endured. You really stood up to Mr. Garrett? Samuel Pritchard asked, awe replacing his former skepticism. We all did, Ash corrected. Your mother, the miners, everyone who chose truth over fear. That's how change happens, not through one person, but through community. Will you leave now? Little Mary Morrison asked anxiously. Now that you're not in trouble, Ash looked at Naomi, who'd come to help with the afternoon lessons. She smiled, and he had his answer. Leave. We just got the chicken coop finished, and the garden's coming in beautifully. Besides, he ruffled Mary's hair. Who else would teach you how to calculate the volume of a mine shaft? That evening, as spring sunset painted Pine Hollow in gold and rose, Ash and Naomi sat on their porch, the garden spread before them, green with promise. The new chicken coop housed 6 hens that pecked contentedly. It was profoundly ordinary and absolutely perfect. I never thanked you, Ash said, for saving the documentation, for thinking ahead when I could only see the immediate threat. We saved each other, Naomi corrected. That's what partners do. Partners. He pulled her close. I like that better than husband and wife, though we're that too. Speaking of which, you still owe me a proper proposal. You promised on one knee, with flowers and pretty words. Ash laughed and slid from his chair to kneel before her, picking a wildflower from the garden plot. Naomi Bell Black, he said formally. You found me broken and nameless, gave me purpose and a future. You stood by me against powerful men and won through wit and courage. Will you continue to be my partner in all things, to help me build a life worth living in this place we've claimed? I will, she said, accepting the flower with mock solemnity. Though you might have asked before we got married. Where's the fun in doing things in order? They laughed, and the sound carried across the evening air. From somewhere in town came the sound of children playing, of normal life resuming. The threat had passed. But more than that, Pine Hollow had found its courage, had remembered that communities could stand against exploitation. You know Garrett's arrest won't fix everything, Naomi said. Other mine owners, other dangers. The fight's not over. No, Ash agreed. But we've shown it can be won. That's something. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. Inside the cabin, on the table, lay plans for expanding the school. Applications from other towns wanting teachers who'd teach practical skills alongside traditional subjects. Letters from miners' families, thanking them for standing firm. No more nightmares last night, Naomi observed. No, I dreamed of Rachel again, but she was... He paused, searching for words. At peace, she said the debt was paid, that building up balance tearing down. Wise woman. She was... Ash stood, pulled Naomi up with him. Dance with me. There's no music? There's always music if you listen. They danced on the porch, slowly, carefully, while Pine Hollow settled into evening routines. Somewhere a fiddle started up, someone celebrating the day's victory. But they'd been dancing to their own rhythm long before that. 2 people who'd found each other in winter and built something lasting. I love you, Ash said. Should have said it months ago. You did, Naomi replied. Every board you nailed, every seed you planted. Words are just one way of telling truth. Still, I love you. Naomi Black, for saving me, challenging me, standing with me. I love you too, whatever name you wear, for staying when you could have run, for teaching children that courage matters, for burning beans and reading stories and being exactly who you are. The fiddle music grew louder, a celebration spreading through the town. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Pine Hollow was free of fear, and 2 people who'd started with nothing but pain had found everything in each other. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but below, in a small cabin at the edge of town, love had taken root as surely as the seeds in the garden. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Old West. I hope Ash and Naomi's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine. If you're listening to this story right now, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're experiencing these tales of courage and love. Whether you're driving through the mountains, relaxing at home, or taking a break at work, your presence here means everything. If you enjoyed this story, Please consider subscribing to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of the American frontier. Hit that like button if this story moved you. And don't forget to click the hype button to help more listeners discover these carefully crafted narratives. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunrise.